Glad you're watching Outnumbered. In the aftermath of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia's death, the White House is saying President Obama now, quote, regrets his decision to filibuster Samuel Alito's Supreme Court nomination in 2006 when he was a senator. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest telling reporters Mr. Obama believes Democrats should not have looked for a way to throw sand in the gears of the process back then, but he says Republicans are going much farther than he did with a pledge not to consider anybody the president nominates. Meanwhile, we're learning President Obama will not attend Scalia's funeral on Saturday. Watch.
The president and the first lady on Friday will travel to the Supreme Court to pay their respects to Justice Scalia as he lies in repose there at the Supreme Court.
The president will not be at the funeral on Saturday.
The president will pay his respects at the Supreme Court on Friday.
The president has said that he's not always as sensitive as he should be on optics. Can you rule out him going golfing on Saturday instead of the funeral?
I don't have a sense of what the president's plans are for Saturday.
Well, that was an opportunity, maybe. President Obama will become the first president to skip the funeral of a sitting Supreme Court justice since 1954. And I say opportunity. Josh Earnest could have said anything other than, well, we'll have to take a look at the schedule, basically.
Yeah, well, we do know President Obama is planning a trip real soon to Cuba. We know he's also going to meet with the guy DeRoy DeRay from Black Lives Matter. You know, I just think there's a certain amount of respect. How can you in one breath say that the Senate should, you know, show a certain amount of decorum, I guess, and go through with a process that he himself didn't want to go through with, and then in the same breath say I'm not going to the funeral of a Supreme Court justice whose ideology I didn't agree with. I mean, he contradicts himself big time there, but we're used to that by now.
Yeah, I want to unpack it a little bit and kind of start from the beginning of where I was there in that, and that has to do with the president expressing regret over having stepped in the way back in 2006. What are your thoughts?
Oh, but hey, go back to what Ernest said, and you said it in the lead-in, that he said that this is different this time. There's a pretty stark difference here, he says, because Republicans are going a step further than Obama with a pledge to not consider anyone the president nominates. Well, I'll let you decide if that is any different than what's happening here, but...
Yeah, is that a fine line? I mean, okay, so they had a person in line for that. There have been some names that have been talked about here. It's not like we can't guess who might be put up for nomination. So is there a fine line? I mean, is the president making a point there?
I think it's such bad spin, and I think Josh Earnest is doing everything he can. He looks exhausted and over his life. He can't
that wasn't water in that cup, I'm telling you right now.
We don't know.
He can't spin, you know, him filibustering. He can't spin the president golfing instead of going to, you know, the Supreme Court.
Spin it? Why didn't he just say no, he's not going golfing?
Because he can't, because it could potentially be true. I mean, that's Press Secretary 101. You dodge and you bob and you weave, but if you can give a concrete answer that he will not be golfing, you say it. I mean, he shouldn't have been wishy-washy, but we've seen him go golfing after the beheading of James Foley. So that reporter's question was on point. Look, President Obama has been the most extra-constitutional president, disrespectful, arrogant of the process, circumventing Congress. He has no leg to stand on when he talks about Republicans flouting the process and flouting the Constitution. As a former constitutional professor, he should understand the implications of skipping the funeral. It is not presidential, as you mentioned, Charles. And he has ignored so many times the process of how things should work when Republicans put legislation forward. He's circumvented it. So for him to say, I look back and I regret, too bad, so sad. No one takes you seriously because you're a hypocrite and a liar.
All right, so I'm digging through my notes right now because she said that phrase. Extra-constitutional. It's my favorite thing that Andrea ever says. And I'm thinking about something that we talked about on the couch. Senator Schumer. Remember him? And on tape over the weekend on Fox Report, we showed that, you know, just a few years ago, he was saying that you don't rule out this process going forward. Basically not agreeing with the White House on how this should be handled, right? So then I look, and he's cutting off funding, the president of the White House, to New York City now with regard to terrorism. And in the comments yesterday that Josh Earnest said, he referenced Schumer's opposition to the Iran deal and other things, saying Schumer's credibility is talking about national security issues, particularly when the facts are is that they are, when it relates to Homeland Security, have been affected by the positions he's taken on other issues. It sounds a little bit like retribution. And why do I bring this up right now? Because if you go against the White House on this issue, I've heard you say it before, extra constitutionality. Is that what we're looking at?
We're not only looking at that, specifically with the issue of Homeland Security funding. In the Department of Homeland Security budget, the numbers are there. This administration has deliberately, Harris, misappropriated and misdirected funds for years that should be going to fight radical Islamic jihadism, to fight right-wing extremism. That's why they are drawing down these resources, because they believe that Republicans are a greater threat than radical Islamic jihadists. It's a huge story, and everyone in the media is fast asleep while it's happening right before our eyes.
Yeah, and I made that left turn to turn right because Schumer, what he was basically saying is you don't replace somebody on the Supreme Court in the last 18 months of a presidency, and this is even less than 18 months, going against the White House on that issue, and now some talk about some things happening with Chuck Schumer's home state, with him mentioned by Josh Earnest yesterday. All right, we'll move on.